They make music on their computers, and they are able to speak to each other.
And you see, I'd love to say, you know, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
No one could have predicted that the greatest act of revenge in cinematic history would begin with a lie inside a movie theater. At the age of 6, Steven Spielberg walked into a theater thinking he was about to see a real circus. But no, it was just a movie. The boy felt betrayed, and that very moment triggered a terrifying chain reaction. A disappointed child would take his revenge by creating some of the greatest films of all time. Jaws turned the ocean into a global obsession. Jurassic Park brought dinosaurs back to life through groundbreaking CGI technology. He wasn't just the king of the box office, but the pioneer of an entire era of modern blockbusters, where emotion and technology became one. But what transformed a struggling student, bullied and rejected by film schools, into a god of Hollywood? And why did it take Steven Spielberg 76 years to finally dare reveal the most painful truth of his life in The Fabelmans? This is the untold story of secrets and shocking twists behind the spotlight that no one ever saw coming. Steven Spielberg was born in 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a Russian Jewish family. His father, Arnold Spielberg, was a brilliant electrical engineer who helped develop the first commercial computer in the 1950s. His mother, Leah Posner, was a promising concert pianist who eventually gave up the stage to become a full-time mother. From a very young age, Spielberg lived in a world suspended between logic and emotion, between a mechanical, rational father and an artistic, dreamy mother. But it was precisely this clash that planted the seed for his future cinematic universe, a place where emotion and technology would never be separated. The Spielberg household was far from stable. They constantly moved due to his father's work, from Haddon Township, New Jersey, to Phoenix, Arizona, and eventually settled in Saratoga, California. Throughout this time, Steven stood out, but not in a good way. He was bullied for having a too Jewish last name, mocked for his protruding ears and awkward demeanor. Some kids even said, if your name ended in Berg, you'd be German. But Spiel makes you Jewish. And at school? Spielberg once said bluntly, I was the last kid picked for every sports team. But that didn't stop the 8-year-old boy from grabbing the family's 8mm camera and starting to build his own dreams. Spielberg's childhood was lit by the blue glow of a TV screen left on all night. He grew up with television, with his mother's piano playing, and with stories of the Holocaust, stories his parents chillingly called the grown-up murders. Although his family hadn't lost any direct relatives in the massacre, those memories lingered like silent scars, threading their way into the soul of a Jewish boy growing up in conservative America. He didn't have close friends, but the camera made him feel less alone. He made The Last Gun, 1959, a cowboy movie at age 13. Then came Battle Squad, Firelight, Escape to Nowhere, war and sci-fi films edited by hand, shot in the backyard with actors played by neighborhood kids and his sister Ann Spielberg. But the true beginning came with a shock. At age 6, young Steven was taken by his father to see the greatest show on earth. He thought he was going to a real circus, only to realize he was watching a movie. He felt deceived, betrayed. But instead of getting angry, he became curious. He never forgot the scene of the train crash on screen, and once home, he tried everything to recreate it using model trains and a Super 8 camera. That was the fateful moment a child decided to take revenge on the world, by creating films the world would never forget. Rejected by USC and UCLA, the sacred temples of American filmmaking, Steven Spielberg boxed up his dream of becoming a director and settled for studying English at Cal State Long Beach as a safe Plan B. But instead of writing essays or analyzing literature, the young student devoted himself to slicing together 8mm film reels, driven by a wild conviction. Cinema was the only way he could exist in this world. Before he found his path, Spielberg, too, had wandered. Slipstream, his first independent film project in 1967, quickly stalled. But instead of giving up, he pivoted to make Amblin, 1968, a short film with no dialogue, no script, just visuals and emotion, shot in the desert, where light, movement, and loneliness told the story in place of characters. His unique visual approach, deeply influenced by the European New Wave, made the film a phenomenon. The work stunned Sidney Scheinberg, president of Universal TV, so much that he signed Spielberg to a 7-year contract, making him the youngest director in Universal's history, at just 20 years old. Then came his first major challenge, directing an episode of Night Gallery starring the legendary Joan Crawford. Spielberg was 21. Crawford was in her 60s, a towering icon of classical Hollywood, and she was horrified to discover that the one behind the camera was a kid whose voice hadn't even cracked. She called Universal headquarters and asked, "Isn't there anyone over 70 who can direct me?" The next morning, no one knew what had changed her mind. But right before the camera rolled, surrounded by a seasoned crew who had worked with DeMille, Ford, Hawks, Joan Crawford stood up, turned to them, and declared, "I've worked with this director already. I trust him. Treat him the way you'd treat me." Spielberg, who had never worked with her before, was frozen in disbelief. But that moment changed everything. Crawford's benevolent lie didn't just save a young director from condescending eyes, it gave him the first taste of trust from the world he so desperately longed to be part of. Still, Spielberg's filmmaking style soon irritated NBC. He dared to shoot through the crystal beads of chandeliers, used mirror reflections for framing, and cut sequences in abstract fashion, techniques utterly foreign to 1960s American television. His style, influenced by Truffaut, Godard, and Bergman, forced the network to re-edit entire episodes after he'd finished shooting. In 1971, he directed Duel, a low-budget TV movie about a man being hunted by a faceless truck. No blood, no excessive dialogue, no visible villain, just pure, suffocating tension. Critics called it Psycho on Wheels, and it was no surprise that Hitchcock's influence loomed over every frame. No one expected a young director to shoot through chandelier crystals or compose skewed angles like some surreal fusion of European cinema and American television in the California desert. In 1974, he made his feature film debut with The Sugarland Express, a thrilling road trip movie starring Goldie Hawn. It received critical praise, but the box office remained cold. For others, that might have been the end. But success wasn't far off, and he would truly reach it with Jaws, 1975. 1975, Jaws. This was the film considered the first summer blockbuster in history, and it was Steven Spielberg who defined the very concept. But the production itself was a nightmare. The mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce after Spielberg's lawyer, kept breaking down due to salt water corroding its control systems. Filming time doubled. The budget spun out of control. Spielberg even feared being typecast as the guy who only makes movies about sharks and trucks. After Duel, 1971. Ordinarily, this would be the formula for a cinematic disaster. But Spielberg thought differently. He turned technical failure into artistic device. Since the shark couldn't appear early on, he crafted an invisible predator, heard only through sound, seen only by its fin, and felt through the fear in the victim's eyes. He posed the question, what's scarier, a monster you can see or something you can't? Instead of gore, he used the motion of the water, floating yellow barrels, broken docks, and low-angle shots from the shark's perspective to build suspense. The BBC later noted that films like Alien, 1979, borrowed directly from these techniques. Time Out described Spielberg's camera work as a predator gliding through the Atlantic. Spielberg told a layered story. With a simple plot, he crafted a complex journey. Quint the Hunter, Robert Shaw, embodied instinct, Hooper the oceanographer, Richard Dreyfuss, represented intellect, and Chief Brody, Roy Scheider, was a man torn between duty and fear. According to the Daily Jaws, the fact that Brody nearly loses his son made him more relatable than any super cop of the 70s. Even the quiet moments were fully utilized. In one seemingly calm scene, Brody chats with his wife at the window as the kids play near the dock. But the sound begins to fade, the tension quietly builds. The climax hits as Ellen reads a book and sees a picture of a shark attacking a boat, a wordless moment that leaves viewers breathless. The Dissolve noted, Spielberg deliberately lowered the sound to make the children seem small and fragile, amplifying the lurking threat. And then there was the music, a two-note theme by John Williams, simple yet haunting, pounding like a warning from the deep. Spielberg once said, "That music is half the movie." The New York Times called it one of the most iconic film scores of all time. Jaws shattered every box office record, grossing over $470 million worldwide, a staggering figure for 1975. It became the highest-grossing film of all time until Star Wars dethroned it 2 years later. Spielberg didn't just make a horror film. He redefined how blockbusters were released, with the first-ever nationwide rollout and massive marketing campaign in Hollywood history. The film won 3 Academy Awards: editing, score, and sound. The Washington Post called it one of the most thrilling movies ever made. Newsweek wrote, "Jaws terrifies you to your bones." In 2023, USA Today listed it among the 25 horror films you must see at least once in your life. Of course, Jaws wasn't perfect. Lee Fierro's performance as the grieving mother was called wooden. In some scenes, bare trees were clearly visible in summer, a giveaway that filming actually took place in fall. But no one cared, because in 1975, Steven Spielberg redefined fear and gave birth to the modern blockbuster era, where emotion was wrapped in high technology, told with masterful rhythm, and powered by the heart of a dreamer. 2 years after Jaws, when all of Hollywood was waiting for Spielberg to follow up with another horror film, he did the unthinkable. He told a story about faith through aliens. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was unlike any UFO movie before it. No invasions, no catastrophes, no running from danger. Spielberg didn't tell a story about fearing the unknown, but about the longing to connect. The idea had been with him since childhood, early mornings when his father took him out to the fields to watch meteor showers, and memories of watching films like The Day the Earth Stood Still or War of the Worlds. At just 18, he shot Firelight, an amateur film about aliens, and later reused its script as the foundation for Close Encounters. Originally titled Watch the Skies, the project began with a script by Paul Schrader, who was later dismissed for lacking emotional depth. Spielberg rewrote it himself, centering the story on an ordinary man, Roy Neary, a lineman from Indiana, who sees a UFO and becomes obsessed. The role went to Richard Dreyfuss after Steve McQueen turned it down, saying he couldn't cry on screen. Alongside Dreyfuss were Terry Garr as Roy's wife, Melinda Dillon as a mother whose child is abducted, and most notably, French director François Truffaut, playing the scientist decoding the alien signals. The initial budget was $2.7 million, but ballooned to $19.4 million because Spielberg was determined to build a breathtaking world, from the deserts of New Mexico and Wyoming's Devil's Tower to a massive spaceship floating in the sky. Douglas Trumbull, 2001, A Space Odyssey, handled the special effects. John Williams composed the iconic 5-note melody for alien-human communication, and at Spielberg's request, it subtly incorporated the tune When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio. The film was released on November 16, 1977, just months after Star Wars, and instantly became a pop culture icon, earning 4 Golden Globe nominations and an Oscar nomination for Best Director. Later, Close Encounters was inducted into the U.S. National Film Registry and cited as inspiration for E.T., The X-Files, Arrival, Super 8, and more. To this day, Spielberg still sees it as his most personal film, a story not just about aliens, but about faith, light, and the yearning to reach beyond our reality. After Aliens, Spielberg didn't return to Jaws for a sequel. Instead, he turned to his close friend, George Lucas, and together they came up with a wild idea. Create a classic-style adventurer like James Bond, but one who wears a rumpled shirt, teaches archaeology, and hates snakes. That was Indiana Jones. Full name Henry Walton Jones Jr., but everyone calls him Indy. A fearless, sharp-witted, reckless archaeology professor who can go from lecturing in a classroom to leaping over booby traps to snatch ancient artifacts from Nazi hands. And the man who brought this icon to life, none other than Harrison Ford. Raiders of the Lost Ark was born like a dream reborn from the childhood of Spielberg and Lucas, two kids raised on adventure comics and old black-and-white Saturday matinee serials. But this time, they elevated everything to the level of modern cinema. Lifelike action, handcrafted props, minimal yet effective visual effects, and a pacing so tight you could barely breathe. No bombastic gunfights, no loud CGI spectacle. Yet through Spielberg's direction, like a master conductor, he crafted action sequences now considered benchmarks of American cinema. The truck chase in the desert, the marketplace brawl in Cairo, and the moment the Ark opens, angels turning into demons, are prime examples of how Spielberg transformed technique into emotion. Audiences didn't love Indiana Jones because he was invincible, but because he was so human. He feared snakes, he tripped, he got hurt, he doubted himself and failed. But he never gave up. And that's exactly why Indy, according to the American Film Institute, became the second greatest movie hero of all time, just behind Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. Raiders of the Lost Ark grossed nearly $390 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1981, winning 4 Academy Awards, and being preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry as a culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant work. But Indiana Jones's impact didn't stop at the box office. It redefined the adventure genre, creating a new kind of hero, not godlike, but cool enough to make every viewer want to live like him. Even archaeology itself got a renewed spark thanks to Indy, so much so that National Geographic once called it the Indiana Jones effect. In 2008, Harrison Ford, who portrayed Indy for over 40 years, was awarded the Bandelier Award by the Archaeological Institute of America for inspiring public interest in artifacts and archaeology. Across 4 films and with the final chapter, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny on the horizon, Indy's journey may be coming to an end. But his image, the whip, the fedora, and that fearless gaze has become a pop culture monument, a piece of childhood, a fragment of the adventure dream we've all longed to live. After Jaws, Close Encounters, and Indiana Jones, Hollywood had begun to believe Steven Spielberg could tackle any genre. But no one expected that his most personal film would be about a boy and an alien. E.T. the Extraterrestrial was born out of loneliness. When his parents divorced, 14-year-old Steven imagined an invisible friend to keep him company. 20 years later, he turned that memory into a film, retelling his own childhood through a language that was tender and cinematic. E.T. wasn't a film about aliens. It was a film about abandoned children, about pain, empathy, and how we learn to love something completely unfamiliar. In the story, young Elliot meets E.T., a creature left behind on Earth. Both are alone, both misunderstood by the adult world, and both find shelter in one another. Spielberg once said, "I made E.T. before I had kids, but the film made me realize I wanted them." The film didn't just move audiences, it created a global cultural symbol. With a modest budget of $10.5 million, E.T. grossed nearly $800 million worldwide, shattering every box office record at the time and becoming the highest-grossing film in history until Titanic came along. The score by John Williams, especially the moment when E.T. and the children soar across the trees on bicycles, remains one of the most emotionally resonant pieces ever composed for film. Spielberg shot the scene with only moonlight and headlights, yet crafted one of the most beautiful moments in cinema history. E.T. also launched a new trend in the industry: product placement. The scene where Elliot lures E.T. with Reese's Pieces boosted the candy's sales by 65% in just a few weeks, a triumph both artistically and commercially. The film received 9 Academy Award nominations, winning 4, and was later honored by the American Film Institute as one of the 25 greatest films of all time. E.T. didn't just make audiences tear up with that iconic farewell, "I'll be right here." It taught an entire generation how to say "I love you" through a look, through acceptance. Steven Spielberg turned an imaginary friend into a living cinematic legacy. And in the process of making E.T., he didn't just create a film, he awakened the deepest, most human part of himself. After E.T., Steven Spielberg didn't pause to catch his breath. He plunged straight into the most prolific, creative phase of his life, a period where every genre bowed to him, every box office was conquered, and every child born in the 1980s grew up under Spielberg's cinematic glow. In just 5 years, he directed or produced a wave of iconic films, each with its own flavor, yet all unmistakably stamped with his touch. Gremlins, 1984, with its lovable chaos. The Goonies, 1985, which awakened the treasure-hunting dreams of every teenager. Back to the Future, 1985, which redefined time travel on the big screen. Then came The Color Purple, 1985, the film that introduced Oprah Winfrey to cinema and marked Spielberg's first foray into themes of racial injustice and domestic violence, a serious turning point in his storytelling journey. Or Empire of the Sun, 1987, a child's perspective of war, as if Spielberg were recounting his own fractured childhood, but this time through the eyes of 13-year-old Christian Bale. As the decade drew to a close, he brought Indiana Jones back in The Last Crusade, 1989, this time facing off not just against Nazis, but against his own father, played by Sean Connery. A dazzling adventure, yet beneath it lay a deeply personal tale, a son spending his life seeking approval from his father, a haunting echo of Spielberg's own journey. No other director in history managed to balance peak entertainment and emotional depth like that, all within the same stretch of time. It wasn't just a box office peak, it was a moment when Hollywood truly rested in the hands of Steven Spielberg. And then, just 4 years later, he would do the unthinkable, portray the most horrific genocide of the 20th century, in black and white. But before that, he had to breathe life into dinosaurs that had been extinct for millions of years. No one had ever done this, and perhaps no one ever will again. In 1993, Steven Spielberg directed 2 films at once. One was Jurassic Park, which ushered in a new era of CGI. The other was Schindler's List, the most haunting black and white portrayal of the Holocaust ever made. 2 opposite cinematic worlds, one creator, and both changed film history. Jurassic Park didn't just bring dinosaurs back to life, it gave birth to modern digital cinema. For the first time, CGI wasn't just a supporting tool, it became the very soul of the film. From fossilized bones, Spielberg breathed life and fear into them. Audiences in 1993 didn't just watch a movie. They believed they were actually being chased. Global box office exploded, over 900 million, the highest ever at the time. But just as dinosaurs were roaring on screen, Spielberg quietly returned to the trauma of his childhood. The Holocaust, a story his mother once told him, one he had relived in silent nightmares. Schindler's List told the story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman and former Nazi party member who risked his entire fortune to save more than 1,100 Jews from death camps. Spielberg filmed on location in Poland, using natural light, handheld cameras, and shot the entire film in black and white, as if he too were a witness. No musical score, no visual effects, no big stars, just raw truth carved deep into the viewer's memory. The little girl in the red coat amid a world of grayscale, that was the conscience Spielberg wanted to awaken. The film won 7 Academy Awards, including Spielberg's first for Best Director. But he said, "This wasn't a film for Hollywood. It was a film I had to make to become a whole person." In 1993, Spielberg rebuilt 2 things that had been lost. 1. The wonder of imagination through dinosaurs. 2. The memory of humanity through a list. And from that moment on, he was no longer just a director. He was a living legacy of cinema. After Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg didn't stop. He didn't look back at his peak. He kept running. And with every film, he etched a new scar on the emotional and historical map of humankind. In 1998, he brought audiences to the shores of Normandy, not through narration, but through shaky, jarring, dust and blood-stained shots. Saving Private Ryan was unlike any war film before it. It didn't glorify, didn't justify, it simply left a lingering shock down to the bone. For that, Spielberg won his second Oscar for Best Director, not for technique, but for the truth he dared to face. Then in 2001, when Stanley Kubrick, the master of cinematic coldness, passed away, he left behind an unfinished project, AI, artificial intelligence. The only person Kubrick trusted to carry it on was Spielberg. And unexpectedly, when Hollywood's warmest storyteller inherited Kubrick's coldest vision, something miraculous happened. AI became a unique cinematic experiment, half cold logic, half the heart of a child yearning to be loved. For the first time, Spielberg placed himself in the role of a father, even if he never wrote those words down. Amid these artistic storms, he co-founded DreamWorks SKG with Jeffrey Katzenberg and David Geffen, a new studio daring to dream of Hollywood's lost golden age. They didn't just produce films, they redefined how films were made, giving Spielberg the freedom to be both a director and the master of his own creative destiny. From there, he left behind unforgettable footprints. A con man who could fly, Catch Me If You Can. A man trapped between an airport and history, The Terminal. A brutal revenge cloaked in morality, Munich. A lonely president in his final battle for human rights, Lincoln. A journalist standing up to power, The Post. A belated love letter to Broadway, West Side Story. And through it all, his influences were always present. From David Lean's epic compositions, Lawrence of Arabia, to Kubrick's harsh silences, 2001, A Space Odyssey. From John Ford's Western Shadows, The Searchers, to Kurosawa and Capra, men who taught him one thing: tell the story as if your life depends on it. And Spielberg did exactly that. Steven Spielberg once said he could imagine entire worlds in his head, but couldn't quite understand what was going on in his own heart. In 1976, during a casting session for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he met Amy Irving, a young, talented actress with deep, soulful eyes. They fell in love, broke up, reunited, and eventually married in 1985. It was Spielberg's first marriage, and also one of the most controversial chapters of his life. The couple had a son together, Max Samuel Spielberg, born the same year they wed. But by 1989, the marriage ended. What happened next stunned Hollywood. At the divorce trial, Spielberg presented a prenuptial agreement, handwritten on a napkin. It clearly outlined the post-divorce settlement Amy would receive. However, the court rejected the legal validity of the impromptu document. The result? Amy Irving was awarded $100 million, one of the most expensive breakups in Hollywood history. Still, behind the spotlight, they chose to be civil co-parents. Spielberg and Irving maintained a friendly relationship, raising their son Max together, as if the cracks in their marriage weren't enough to erase the love they shared for a small, innocent life. Then Spielberg found light again, but this time it came from the eyes of another woman. In 1984, while directing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, he cast an actress for the female lead, Kate Capshaw. Spielberg never imagined that Capshaw would become the one who would lead him back to his Jewish roots after years of distance. Before their wedding, Capshaw, a Protestant by faith, voluntarily converted. Not halfway, she spent a year studying the Torah, completed the mikveh ritual, and officially became Jewish before the ceremony. Spielberg later said, emotionally, "She made me a better Jew than my parents ever could." On October 12, 1991, they married, not under the spotlight, but in mutual reverence and respect. It's a marriage that has lasted to this day, more than 3 decades, and is considered one of Hollywood's most enduring families. The couple resides in Pacific Palisades, California, and East Hampton, New York, raising a family of 7 children, 3 biological, 2 adopted, one of Kate's from a previous relationship, Jessica Capshaw, and one of Spielberg's from his first marriage. Jessica, now a well-known actress from Grey's Anatomy, once described holiday gatherings at the Spielberg house as a big family, within a big family. She recalled that Christmases at her stepfather's house rarely involved Santa Claus, but often featured the director of Jurassic Park in festive pajamas circling the house. "I have pictures of him in pajamas, printed with Santa's face, not actual Santa, but holiday-themed Spielberg," Jessica laughed. But what touched Jessica the most was the feeling of togetherness. Something rare in Hollywood, where broken families are more common than lasting ones. "The holidays aren't just holidays anymore. They've become family trips, and I couldn't be more excited to go home," she said. The Spielberg family has become one of the director's most steadfast anchors in the ever-shifting world of cinema. While the world calls him the king of the box office, at home, he's just the man in Santa print pajamas, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. For Steven Spielberg, his second marriage wasn't just about love. It was healing. It was the chance to be a father in the truest sense, and a place where he could tell stories not with a camera, but with his heart. Outside of marriage, one of Spielberg's deepest emotional scars came from his mother's infidelity, a secret that haunted him for decades. It took over half a century for him to find the courage to tell that truth in a film he wrote and directed himself, The Fabelmans, 2022. It was his confession, his reckoning with the greatest rupture in his family, when he discovered his mother was having an affair with his father's best friend. It was never spoken about, not by his parents, and not something a 16-year-old could truly understand. But Spielberg, while editing a home movie from a camping trip, noticed a look in his mother's eyes, too long, too tender, directed at a man who wasn't her husband. Benny Lowy, his father's close friend, present at dinners, family outings, and quietly in his mother's heart, was that man. Back then, Spielberg said nothing, and from that moment, the camera was no longer just a storytelling device. It became a shield, a place to hide his feelings, turn tragedy into images, and control the world by reconstructing it through a lens. The Fabelmans doesn't just revisit that past, it reveals something deeper. The child he once was never stopped being torn between love and anger, between a longing to forgive and the need to understand why grown-ups hurt each other so deeply. Spielberg didn't condemn his mother, nor did he turn his father into a victim. He simply told the story, with tenderness and with a pain that never fully healed. Though he's avoided public scandals for most of his life, Steven Spielberg hasn't been immune to controversy, because his career is too long, too monumental, and too influential to ever be completely untouchable. Even Schindler's List, a masterpiece hailed as one of the greatest Holocaust films ever made, was not without criticism. Some critics argued that Spielberg had Americanized the Jewish tragedy, using cinematic beauty to soften a horror that should remain unsoftened, and shifting the emotional center of the story to a German Oskar Schindler rather than to the victims. They claimed he made audiences cry, but didn't make them face the raw, brutal truth deeply enough. Jurassic Park, his CGI milestone that opened a new era in film, also brought unexpected backlash when a behind-the-scenes photo went viral, showing Spielberg sitting next to a dead dinosaur. Some mistook it as real and accused him of hunting endangered species. Though it was obviously a misunderstanding, it revealed a darker truth. One misleading image can become a social media firestorm in an instant. The Indiana Jones franchise, where Spielberg and Lucas created a cultural icon over more than 4 decades, has also faced accusations of colonialist undertones. The image of a white man cast as the one who discovers and claims treasures from ancient civilizations has drawn criticism. Scenes like eating monkey brains or ripping out a still-beating heart in Temple of Doom offended many in India, who felt their culture was reduced to exotic spectacle. As the film industry entered the digital age, Spielberg was even seen by some as overly traditional. In 2019, he publicly opposed Netflix films being considered for the Oscars, arguing they were television movies and shouldn't be ranked alongside theatrical cinema. That statement led many to label him outdated, ironically out of touch with the very wave of innovation he once helped ignite. Even behind the scenes, Spielberg's name has occasionally been drawn into disputes over profits, rights, and the division of power in film production contracts. While he has never faced formal accusations, his immense influence has made his shadow a constant presence in any conversation about authority and equity in Hollywood. These controversies don't diminish his talent, but they serve as a reminder. When you are Steven Spielberg, the storyteller of the world in turn will scrutinize every story you tell. No one has defined modern cinema more clearly than Steven Spielberg. He turned visual effects into emotion. He transformed the box office into a storytelling arena. And he became the compass guiding an entire generation of filmmakers, from Christopher Nolan to Denis Villeneuve, from J.J. Abrams to Peter Jackson, all of whom call him their spiritual mentor. With over $10 billion in global box office revenue, 2 Academy Awards for Best Director, and timeless works like Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, and Indiana Jones, Spielberg didn't just make movies. He made legends. He was the first living person to be officially immortalized as a Lego figure and remains the only director to have received both the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom and France's Légion d'honneur. His films have sparked millions of cinematic dreams, inspiring thousands to pursue the craft of visual storytelling. Through the Shoah Foundation, he also preserved the testimonies of over 50,000 Holocaust survivors, turning cinema into a weapon against forgetting. Steven Spielberg isn't just the most successful director of all time, he is the living encyclopedia of 20th century cinema. At 78, while many of his peers have faded into the background, Steven Spielberg continues to create without pause. He's not just a director, he's a dream that refuses to end. Currently, Spielberg is developing a new science fiction project about UFOs, his first return to the genre since Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. The film is based on his original concept, with a screenplay by David Koop and a cast including Emily Blunt, Colin Firth, and Coleman Domingo. It's set for a summer 2026 release. At the same time, he's producing The Goonies 2, nearly 40 years after the original became a generational icon. On Broadway, Spielberg is also bringing Smash, a series about the behind-the-scenes world of musical theater, to the stage, with a vibrant season slated to begin in April 2025 at the Imperial Theater. On television, he's executive producing Masters of the Air, an Apple TV Plus miniseries about American bomber pilots in World War II, continuing the spirit of Band of Brothers in the Pacific. Despite his packed schedule, he still finds time for walks, golf, and the occasional round of Assassin's Creed. In 2002, he finally graduated from college after years of postponement by submitting Schindler's List in lieu of a thesis. At home, he lives with his wife, Kate Capshaw, and their children in Pacific Palisades, California, and East Hampton, New York. On holidays, the Spielberg-Capshaw clan still gathers in full. As Jessica Capshaw once described, "We're a big family within a big family, and my dad has a full Santa Claus pajama set." Recently, at the 30th anniversary gala of the Shoah Foundation, Meryl Streep honored Spielberg for his tireless efforts to preserve Holocaust memory. At the event, he spoke candidly about the rising tide of anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, and societal division. Dialogue is the only cure. History cannot be distorted, and the truth should never be forgotten. Now nearing 80, Spielberg remains very much the boy he once was, fascinated by model explosions and tricks of light. But today, he does it for the entire world. He isn't just a director, he is an entire era of cinema. In over 50 years behind the camera, Steven Spielberg has made more than 35 films spanning dinosaurs to aliens, world wars to time-traveling adventures. He has grossed over $10 billion at the box office, won 3 Academy Awards, received 7 nominations for Best Director, and carved his name into the hearts of millions around the globe. From Jaws to Schindler's List, from E.T. to the Fabelmans, he hasn't just told great stories, he's redefined the very way we experience cinema. And at 77, he continues to create, proving that dreams, when told through film, never grow old. Has a Spielberg film ever touched you to the core? Do you have a childhood memory tied to the music of John Williams or the silhouette of Indiana Jones's fedora? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe legends like Spielberg deserve to be remembered forever, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next story. Let's keep this cinematic light burning bright.